London, 1808. The Devonshire ballroom blazed with 1,000 candles, their light reflecting off gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers. Music swelled as dancers whirled across the marble floor in a dazzling display of silk, satin and jewels. Everyone except Eleanor Hartley. At 25, Eleanor had attended precisely 43 balls over 7 seasons. At each one she had stood in the same position, near the potted palms by the terrace doors, far enough from the dance floor to avoid pity, close enough to maintain the pretense of participation. Tonight marked ball number 44. She smoothed the skirt of her pale green gown, a modest creation that had served her for 3 seasons. Around her, young ladies giggled behind fans, their dance cards already filled. Eleanor's card remained blank. "Still holding up the wall, I see," came a familiar voice. Eleanor turned to find Margaret Ashford, her childhood friend. Margaret had married well in her 2nd season and attended London balls out of obligation. "Someone must ensure the architecture remains stable," Eleanor replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Margaret's expression softened. "Eleanor, perhaps if you smiled more? Pretended to be less intelligent?" Eleanor shook her head. "I tried that in my first 3 seasons. It changed nothing." The truth was simple and devastating. Eleanor Hartley was plain, not ugly but unremarkably ordinary in a world that prized beauty above all else. Her hair was nondescript brown, her figure neither willowy nor curvaceous, her features regular but unmemorable. She possessed no fortune to compensate for her lack of beauty. She was, in society's assessment, nothing. "I heard your brother is pressuring you again," Margaret said quietly. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Charles has made his position clear. I am a burden on the family. He has given me until the end of this season to secure a husband, any husband, or I shall be sent to live with our aunt in Yorkshire." "Aunt Prudence? But she's dreadful." "She is what Charles believes I deserve, a spinster caring for an invalid in a remote village where no one will be troubled by our existence." Margaret gripped her hand. "Surely there must be someone." "There isn't," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Some of us are not destined for marriage. We are destined for endurance." A sudden commotion at the entrance drew attention. The music stopped as conversations died. "His Grace, the Duke of Ashford," announced the butler. Julian Ashford, 8th Duke of Ashford, stood framed in the doorway. At 32, he was universally acknowledged as the most eligible bachelor in England. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and startling blue eyes, he commanded attention effortlessly. But it wasn't merely his appearance. The Duke possessed wealth beyond measure, estates in 4 counties, a London townhouse that rivaled royal residences, and a reputation for intelligence and honor. He also never danced. In 6 years since inheriting the title, the Duke had attended 12 balls. At each one, he'd remained on the periphery, conversing with gentlemen, politely declining every invitation to dance, and departing early. His presence tonight was unexpected. Eleanor watched as the Duke moved through the crowd. Mothers positioned their daughters in his path. Young ladies arranged themselves in artful poses, but the Duke acknowledged each attempt with a polite nod and continued forward. His path led directly past Eleanor's position. She pressed herself back against the wall, making herself invisible. The Duke would pass by without noticing her, as everyone did. But the Duke didn't pass by. He stopped directly in front of Eleanor, those blue eyes fixing on her with intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice a rich baritone. Eleanor stared in shock. He knew her name. The Duke of Ashford knew her name. Around them, conversations stopped. Every eye in the ballroom fixed on this impossible scene. "Your Grace," Eleanor managed, dropping into a curtsy, "I wonder if I might have the honor of your company for a moment. Perhaps a turn on the terrace. If this story touches your heart, subscribe and leave a comment below. Your support means everything." Without waiting for her response, he offered his arm. Eleanor glanced at Margaret, whose eyes were wide with astonishment, then back at the Duke. This had to be a mistake. Perhaps he'd confused her with someone else. But his expression held no mockery. If anything, there was something gentle in his gaze that made her place her hand tentatively on his arm. The crowd parted before them. Eleanor could feel hundreds of eyes boring into her back, hear the whispers beginning. She'd be the subject of gossip for weeks. The terrace was mercifully empty, cooled by evening breeze. Chinese lanterns cast soft pools of light. Beyond, the Devonshire gardens stretched away into darkness. Eleanor withdrew her hand and turned to face him, gathering her dignity. "Your Grace, I believe there has been some mistake. I am not—" "Eleanor Hartley," he interrupted quietly. "Daughter of the late Viscount Hartley, 25 years old. You live with your brother Charles in Bloomsbury. You are an accomplished watercolorist, though you rarely show your work. You speak 3 languages fluently. You have attended every major ball for 7 seasons and have never once danced." Eleanor's mouth fell open. "How do you possibly know all that?" "I make it my business to be well informed, particularly about interesting people." "I am not interesting, Your Grace. I am quite possibly the least interesting person in London." "That is what makes you so interesting." He turned to look at her. "You are intelligent in a world that punishes women for intelligence. You are honest in a society built on pretense. You have endured 7 years of deliberate invisibility without becoming bitter or cruel. Those qualities are rare and valuable." Eleanor's heart pounded. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I have a proposition for you, one that may benefit us both." She searched his expression for signs of mockery or madness. She found neither. "What sort of proposition?" The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying her face. Then he leaned closer, close enough that she could smell sandalwood, and spoke in a low voice meant for her ears alone. "I need a wife, Miss Hartley, not a beautiful ornament to display or a simpering girl to flatter my ego. I need someone intelligent enough to manage my household, strong enough to withstand society's scrutiny, and honest enough to tell me truth. In short, I need someone exactly like you." Eleanor couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. Dukes didn't propose to spinsters on terraces. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough. I know you have been overlooked and undervalued your entire life. I know your brother plans to send you away at season's end. I know you deserve better than slow death in a Yorkshire village." His voice dropped lower. "And I know that you and I could build something real together, a partnership based on mutual respect rather than romantic delusion." "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a breath. "Why me when you could have any woman in England?" "Because every other woman in England wants me for my title or my fortune or my face. You, I suspect, would be perfectly content never to have met me at all." A slight smile touched his lips. "That honesty is exactly what I need." Eleanor's mind reeled. "This is madness. Perhaps. But it's also an opportunity. For both of us." He straightened, putting proper distance between them. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Take 3 days to consider. If you're interested, meet me in Hyde Park at the Serpentine at 4 o'clock on Thursday. If you're not, forget this conversation ever happened." "And if I don't come?" Eleanor asked. "Then I shall know your answer and I will never trouble you again." He bowed formally. "The choice is entirely yours, Miss Hartley. No pressure, no obligation. Simply an offer from one practical person to another." Before she could respond, he turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving Eleanor alone on the terrace with her thoughts spinning. Eleanor remained on the terrace for several minutes after the Duke departed, her hands gripping the stone balustrade as she tried to make sense of what had just occurred. A Duke had proposed to her, not in the traditional sense perhaps, but the intention was clear. Marriage, partnership, an escape from the fate that awaited her in Yorkshire. It was impossible. It was insane. It was everything she had long ago stopped allowing herself to hope for. "Eleanor!" Margaret burst onto the terrace, her face flushed with excitement. "What did he say to you? Everyone is talking about nothing else. Lady Pembroke nearly fainted when he took your arm, and Lady Catherine looked positively murderous." "He asked me to take a turn on the terrace," Eleanor replied carefully. "That's all. That's all. Eleanor, the Duke of Ashford has never shown interest in any woman, not one in 6 years, and tonight he singles you out in front of all of London society." Margaret gripped her friend's arms. "This is extraordinary." "It's peculiar," Eleanor corrected, "and I'm certain by tomorrow everyone will have forgotten about it." But she was wrong. When Eleanor arrived home that night, her brother Charles was waiting in the drawing room despite the late hour. His expression was thunderous. "What," he demanded without preamble, "did you do to attract the Duke of Ashford's attention?" Eleanor removed her gloves slowly. "I did nothing. He approached me. I was as surprised as everyone else." "Surprised?" Charles barked a laugh. "You must have done something. Thrown yourself at him, perhaps. Made a spectacle." "I stood by the wall, as I always do. He came to me." Charles studied her suspiciously. The Duke of Ashford doesn't waste time on plain spinsters without reason. What game are you playing? No game, Charles. He asked me to walk on the terrace. We spoke briefly. That's all. About what? Eleanor hesitated. She couldn't tell her brother about the Duke's proposal, not until she'd decided how to respond. About nothing of consequence. The weather, the gardens. Charles's eyes narrowed. You're lying. I can always tell when you're lying, Eleanor. Your left eye twitches. She forced herself to remain still. I'm not lying. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm quite tired. Wait. Charles moved to block her path. I don't know what you're scheming, but understand this. You have 7 weeks left. 7 weeks to secure a proposal from someone, anyone. If the Duke of Ashford has shown you attention, then you will capitalize on it. Do whatever necessary to secure his interest. Whatever necessary, Eleanor repeated quietly. You know what I mean. Women have ways of ensuring men do their duty. He waved his hand dismissively. Now go. And Eleanor, don't disappoint me. Aunt Prudence's cottage has only 2 rooms, and one of them leaks. Eleanor climbed the stairs to her small bedroom, her mind churning. She had 3 days to decide. 3 days to determine whether accepting the Duke's proposition was brilliant salvation or utter folly. She lit a candle and sat at her small writing desk. Outside her window, London slept. But Eleanor's thoughts raced. What did she truly have to lose? Her current life offered nothing but invisibility and eventual exile. Marriage to the Duke would provide security, position, purpose. He'd been honest about his expectations. He wanted partnership, not passion. Management, not romance. Could she live with that? Could she marry without love? But then, what was love? Eleanor had read novels that spoke of thunderbolts and overwhelming emotion. She'd watched her friends fall into infatuations that faded within months. Real life, she'd learned, was far more prosaic. Perhaps partnership was better. Perhaps mutual respect and honesty could build something stronger than fleeting passion. Or perhaps she was simply rationalizing because the alternative was too grim to contemplate. Thursday, Hyde Park, 4 o'clock. She had 3 days to decide the course of her entire life. The next 3 days passed in a blur of anxiety and indecision. Eleanor barely slept, barely ate. Her mind circled endlessly around the Duke's proposition, examining it from every angle. Margaret called on Wednesday morning, ostensibly for tea but clearly hoping for information. The gossip has been relentless, she reported, settling into Eleanor's small sitting room. Half of society believes the Duke has lost his mind. The other half believes you've somehow bewitched him. Lady Catherine is telling everyone who will listen that it was clearly a mistake, that he meant to approach her daughter. Perhaps he did, Eleanor murmured. Don't be absurd. He knew exactly who you were. He called you by name. Margaret leaned forward. Eleanor, what aren't you telling me? Eleanor wanted desperately to confide in her friend, but the Duke's proposition was too strange, too private to share. Nothing. Truly. Will you see him again? The question hung in the air. Eleanor stared into her teacup. I don't know. Thursday arrived with perfect spring weather. Eleanor woke early, her stomach knotted with nerves. She still hadn't decided. One moment she was certain she would go to Hyde Park. The next, equally certain, she would remain home. By 3 o'clock she'd changed her dress 4 times. The pale blue walking dress, no, too formal. The yellow muslin, too cheerful. The grey wool, too somber. She finally settled on a modest green dress with a cream spencer. If she was going to meet a duke in a public park, she would at least look presentable. If, that word still held all her uncertainty. At 3:15, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window watching the street below. She could stay here, forget the entire strange encounter, return to her predictable, invisible existence. Or she could walk out that door and into an entirely different life. Her hands trembled as she tied her bonnet ribbons. The walk to Hyde Park took 20 minutes. With each step, Eleanor's heart pounded harder. She could still turn back. No one would know. The Duke would simply assume she'd declined his offer, and that would be the end of it. But her feet kept moving forward. Hyde Park was crowded with fashionable society taking their afternoon exercise. Eleanor kept her head down, avoiding eye contact. The last thing she needed was to encounter someone she knew and have to explain her presence. The Serpentine came into view, its water glittering in the afternoon sun. Eleanor's breath caught. Would he truly be there? Had he meant what he said? Or had the entire encounter been some elaborate joke? Then she saw him. The Duke stood near the water's edge, his back to the path. Even from a distance he was unmistakable, tall, broad-shouldered, radiating authority. He wore a dark blue coat that fit his frame perfectly, buff breeches and gleaming Hessian boots. Eleanor's courage nearly failed her. She could still leave. He hadn't seen her yet. She could turn around and... He turned, as if sensing her presence. Their eyes met across the distance, and Eleanor understood in that moment that her decision had already been made. It had been made the moment she left her house. Perhaps it had been made the moment he'd spoken to her on the Devonshire terrace. She walked forward, each step feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "Miss Hartley," the Duke said as she approached. His expression revealed nothing, not relief, not satisfaction, simply acknowledgement. "You came." "I did," Eleanor replied. Her voice was steadier than she'd expected, though I confess I'm still not entirely certain why. "Because you're curious. Because you're intelligent enough to recognize an opportunity when it presents itself. Because you're brave enough to choose the unknown over the unbearable." He gestured to a nearby bench. "Shall we sit? We have much to discuss." Eleanor sat, folding her hands in her lap. Now that she was here, she found herself remarkably calm. "I have questions." "I expected you would." The Duke settled beside her, maintaining proper distance. "Ask anything you wish. I will answer honestly. Why do you truly need a wife? And why me specifically?" The Duke was silent for a moment, his gaze on the Serpentine's waters. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and careful. "The truth is both simple and complicated. I need a wife because society demands it. I'm 32. I've held the title for 6 years. My duty is to secure the succession, to maintain the estates, to uphold the family name." He turned to look at her. "But I have no interest in the games society plays. No patience for false flattery or calculated manipulation. And you believe I won't do those things? I know you won't. You've survived 7 seasons without compromising your integrity. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He paused. "My father married for love, or what he believed was love. My mother was beautiful, charming, accomplished in all the ways society values. She was also selfish, manipulative, and ultimately unfaithful. She made his life miserable before dying in scandal." Eleanor drew in a sharp breath. The late Duchess of Ashford's death had been the subject of gossip, something about an accident while travelling with a companion who wasn't her husband, but Eleanor had never known the details. "I learned from watching my father's suffering," the Duke continued. "Passion fades, beauty ages, but intelligence, integrity, compatibility, those endure. I would rather build a partnership with someone I respect than a romance with someone I desire but cannot trust." "And you believe you can trust me?" Eleanor asked. "You barely know me." "I've observed you for 3 seasons, Miss Hartley, at balls, at the theatre, at garden parties. I've watched how you treat servants, how you speak to those who have nothing to offer you, how you handle being overlooked and dismissed. Character reveals itself in small moments when people believe no one is watching. Your character is sound." Eleanor felt heat rising in her cheeks. "You've been watching me." "Not in any improper way. I simply pay attention. Most people don't, which is why they make poor choices in spouses." He shifted slightly to face her more directly. "Here is what I propose. A marriage of practical partnership. You would be the Duchess of Ashford with all the rights and privileges that entails. You would manage my households. I have 4 estates plus the London house. You would oversee the staff, handle social obligations, and have full authority in domestic matters. And in return, you would provide companionship, not passion. Respect, not romance. You would give me heirs, that is necessary, I'm afraid. But beyond that, you would have considerable freedom. Pursue your painting. Read whatever you wish. Engage your mind in ways most wives are not permitted. I would make only 2 demands: absolute fidelity and absolute honesty. Can you meet those terms?" Eleanor's head spun. "This is highly unusual, Your Grace." "Julian," he corrected. "If we're to be married, you should use my given name." "Julian," she repeated, testing the name. It felt strange on her tongue. "I need to understand something. You speak of partnership and respect. But what if in time, one of us develops feelings beyond partnership?" His expression became guarded. "That would be unfortunate and complicated, but I think it unlikely. I'm not capable of that sort of attachment, Miss Hartley. My father's experience and my own nature have made me immune to romantic sentiment." And you believe I am similarly immune? I believe you're realistic enough to accept what is offered and make the best of it. Am I wrong? Eleanor considered. Everything he said made logical sense. Marriage without the messy complications of emotion. Security without the vulnerability of love. It should have sounded perfect. So why did it make her feel slightly hollow? What if I disappoint you? She asked quietly. What if I'm not capable of being the Duchess you need? For the first time, his expression softened. Miss Hartley, you have survived 7 years of society's cruelty without losing your kindness or your integrity. You have endured being overlooked, dismissed, and undervalued without becoming bitter. If you can survive that, you can certainly survive being a duchess. When? The word escaped before she could stop it. If I agree, when would this happen? As quickly as possible. I would secure a special license. We could be married within a fortnight. A fortnight? Eleanor's eyes widened. That's hardly time to... To what? Plan an elaborate wedding? Neither of us wants that spectacle. A quiet ceremony with minimal fuss would suit us both, I think. He studied her face. But I won't pressure you. Take another week if you need it. I simply ask that you decide soon. Eleanor drew a deep breath. Her entire life could change with one word. Yes. Julian blinked. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. With your terms, partnership, not passion. Respect, not romance. Honesty and fidelity. She met his gaze directly. But I have one condition of my own. Name it, Julian said immediately. Eleanor had been thinking about this since the Devonshire terrace. If she was going to enter into this unusual arrangement, she needed one assurance for her own sanity. Kindness, she said simply. I don't expect love or even affection, but I do expect kindness. I've endured enough cruelty from society. I won't endure it from a husband. Something shifted in Julian's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. That's a reasonable condition, and easily met. I have never been cruel to anyone who didn't deserve it, Miss Hartley. I won't start with my wife. Then we have an agreement. Eleanor extended her hand formally, as if sealing a business arrangement. Julian took it, his hand warm and steady around hers. We have an agreement. He hesitated, then added, You should know that society will be vicious about this. They'll say terrible things about you, about your motives, about our marriage. Can you withstand that? Eleanor thought of 7 years standing against walls. 7 years of whispers and dismissal. 7 years of being nothing. I've withstood worse, she said quietly. At least now I'll withstand it as a duchess. A smile touched Julian's lips. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Spoken like a true partner. Very well, Miss Hartley. I'll call on your brother tomorrow to make the formal request for your hand. I assume he'll approve. He'll likely faint from shock, then approve with unseemly haste, Eleanor replied dryly. Good. And after that, he paused. Would you allow me to introduce you properly to my world? Not as a spectacle, but as my intended. I think it would help ease the transition. That seems sensible. Julian rose and offered his hand to help her stand. Then tomorrow we begin the process of transforming Miss Eleanor Hartley into the Duchess of Ashford. Are you ready? Eleanor took his hand and stood. She wasn't ready. She might never be ready. But ready or not, she had made her choice. As ready as I'll ever be. The announcement of their engagement sent shockwaves through London society. By the following evening, Eleanor's name was on every tongue. The consensus ranged from astonishment to outrage, with generous helpings of malicious speculation. She must have trapped him somehow. He's clearly taken leave of his senses. What could the Duke possibly see in her? Eleanor heard it all, either directly or filtered through Margaret, who reported everything with a mixture of concern and fierce loyalty. Ignore them, Margaret advised as they took tea in Eleanor's sitting room. They're simply jealous. Jealous of what? They don't know the truth of our arrangement. Eleanor stirred her tea absently. They think it's a love match. If they knew it was purely practical, they'd be even more vicious. Is it purely practical? Margaret asked shrewdly. Because I saw the way he looked at you in Hyde Park. There was something there, Eleanor. Respect, perhaps. Or relief at having secured a convenient solution to his problem. Eleanor set down her cup. Don't romanticize this, Margaret. Julian has been very clear about his expectations. This is a partnership, nothing more. And you're truly content with that? Eleanor considered the question. Was she content? Or had she simply accepted what she believed was the best option available? "I'm realistic," she said finally. "And right now, realistic is enough." Julian called the next day, formally requesting permission from Charles to court Eleanor. Her brother's astonishment was almost comical. "The Duke wishes to marry you?" Charles had repeated 3 times, as if saying it aloud would make it more believable. Eleanor, "Yes, Charles, me." Eleanor tried not to feel insulted by his shock. Well then, of course he has my blessing, my enthusiastic blessing. Eleanor, this is extraordinary. The family name will be restored. The connections alone—" Charles's eyes gleamed with calculation. Eleanor felt a flash of irritation. Of course Charles was already thinking of how to exploit her new position. Julian must have sensed her discomfort because he smoothly interjected, "I should mention that I'm quite protective of my wife's time and energy. She'll be occupied with learning to manage my households. Family visits will necessarily be limited." Charles's face fell slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Of course, Your Grace, whatever you think best." After Charles departed, Julian turned to Eleanor. "I hope I didn't overstep, but I recognize that look in your brother's eyes. He was already planning how to use your position for his benefit." "You read him correctly," Eleanor admitted. "Thank you for the intervention. We're partners now. Partners protect each other." He offered his arm. "Now shall we begin your education? There's much you'll need to know about managing Ashford House and the estates." The next 10 days passed in a whirlwind. Julian was true to his word about making the transition manageable. Rather than throwing Eleanor into society's spotlight, he began introducing her to his world in careful stages. First came Ashford House. The London residence was a palatial structure in Mayfair, 4 stories of elegant architecture, filled with priceless art and furniture collected over generations. Eleanor walked through rooms larger than her brother's entire townhouse, trying not to feel overwhelmed. "The housekeeper is Mrs. Winters," Julian explained as they toured the main floor. "She's been with the family for 30 years and knows everything. Don't be intimidated by her stern manner. She's fiercely loyal and extraordinarily competent. Lean on her expertise." Mrs. Winters proved to be exactly as described, a tall, imposing woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that assessed Eleanor thoroughly. "Your Grace," she said, addressing Julian. Then to Eleanor, "Miss Hartley, welcome to Ashford House." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." Eleanor met the woman's gaze steadily. "I confess I'm quite out of my depth. I hope I may rely on your guidance as I learn my new role." Something shifted in Mrs. Winters's expression. Approval, perhaps. "A wise approach, miss. His Grace's mother, God rest her soul, refused all advice and made life difficult for everyone. A duchess who listens is a blessing." After Mrs. Winters departed, Julian commented, "You handled that well. She would have made your life miserable if you'd come in acting superior or pretending to know everything." "I don't pretend to know things I don't," Eleanor replied simply. "It seems pointless. Another reason you'll make an excellent duchess." Julian led her to his private study. "Now, there are some practical matters we should discuss. Financial arrangements primarily." He spent the next hour explaining her allowance, a sum so generous that Eleanor nearly choked, and the household budgets she'd be managing. Julian was methodical and patient, answering her questions without condescension. "You'll have complete authority over domestic expenditures," he explained. "I trust your judgment. If you need something for the household, purchase it. If you want something for yourself, purchase it. The only thing I ask is that you keep accurate records. I'm not miserly, but I do like to know where money is going." "That seems entirely reasonable," Eleanor agreed. She hesitated, then added, "Julian, may I ask something personal?" "Of course. Why are you being so kind about all this? Most husbands wouldn't bother explaining anything. They'd simply expect their wives to manage without instruction or support." Julian set down the papers he'd been reviewing. "Because that approach is both arrogant and inefficient. How can I expect you to succeed if I don't provide the tools and knowledge you need? Besides, I meant what I said about kindness. You're not a servant or an ornament. You're my partner. Partners share information." Eleanor found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "You're a very unusual Duke, Your Grace." "Julian," he corrected again. "And yes, I've been told that numerous times, usually as a criticism. I meant it as a compliment." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not passion, but a warm understanding that felt surprisingly comfortable. The next days brought more lessons. Julian took Eleanor to meet his steward. his man of business, his solicitor. He introduced her to the head gardener at Ashford House and explained the management of the country estates she'd soon oversee. He also began teaching her about society's expectations in her new role. "You'll be invited to everything now," he warned. "Every ball, every dinner, every garden party. You'll be expected to attend at least some of them." Eleanor felt her stomach knot. "The same events where I used to stand against walls?" "Yes. But now you'll be the guest of honor rather than the overlooked spinster. That will require adjustment for both you and society." Julian's expression was sympathetic. "I won't force you to attend everything, but some appearances will be necessary, especially at first. We need to present a united front and show society that ours is a legitimate marriage." "Even though it isn't, really," Eleanor said quietly. Julian frowned. "It's as legitimate as any other marriage. More so than most, I'd argue, since we're entering it with clear expectations and honest intentions. Don't diminish what we're building, Eleanor." The use of her first name without her title made her look up sharply. He'd been doing that more often in private moments. She wasn't sure what to make of it. "I apologize," she said. "You're right, this is legitimate. It's just different." "Different doesn't mean lesser." Julian leaned back in his chair. They were in his study again, reviewing guest lists for their wedding breakfast. "In fact, I'd argue our approach is superior to most marriages. We're not clouded by temporary passion or unrealistic expectations. We're building on solid ground." "Solid but cold," Eleanor murmured before she could stop herself. Julian's expression became unreadable. "Do you find it cold, our interactions?" Eleanor considered. "No, not cold exactly, but not warm either. We're cordial colleagues planning a business merger. And you want more than cordiality?" Did she? Eleanor wasn't sure. She'd convinced herself that partnership without passion was enough, but in quiet moments, she couldn't help wondering what it might feel like if Julian looked at her with something beyond practical respect. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. The wedding took place on a Thursday morning in the private chapel at Ashford House. As promised, it was a small affair, just immediate family, Margaret as Eleanor's witness and Julian's closest friend, Lord Pemberton, as his. Eleanor wore a simple cream silk gown that Julian had insisted on purchasing for her. "You'll be painted in your wedding dress," he'd explained. "The portrait will hang at Ashford Hall for generations. You should wear something worthy of a duchess." The gown was the most beautiful thing Eleanor had ever owned. But as she stood before the mirror on her wedding morning, she felt strangely disconnected from the elegant stranger staring back at her. "You're beautiful," Margaret whispered, tears in her eyes. "Eleanor, you're truly beautiful." Eleanor studied her reflection. The gown certainly helped, so did the maid's skillful arrangement of her hair, but she was still plain Eleanor Hartley underneath the silk and styling. No, not Hartley anymore. In an hour she'd be the Duchess of Ashford. The thought made her dizzy. The ceremony was brief and surprisingly impersonal. The vicar spoke the traditional words. Julian repeated his vows in a steady voice, his expression composed. Eleanor heard her own voice responding, though she barely registered the words. Then Julian was sliding a ring onto her finger, a magnificent band of diamonds and sapphires that must have cost a fortune. His hand was warm and steady. Hers trembled slightly. "You may kiss the bride," the vicar intoned. Julian leaned forward and pressed a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief, proper, and utterly perfunctory. The kiss of a man sealing a contract, not claiming a wife. Eleanor told herself she wasn't disappointed. The wedding breakfast was equally efficient. Toasts were made, food was served. Conversations were polite and carefully neutral. Charles looked smug. Margaret looked emotional. Julian's friend Pemberton looked mildly puzzled but said nothing. Through it all, Eleanor felt as if she were watching herself from a distance. This was her wedding day. She was now a duchess. Her life had changed completely in the span of 2 hours. So why did she feel so numb? By early afternoon, the guests had departed. Julian had arranged for Eleanor's belongings to be moved to Ashford House the previous day. There would be no wedding trip. Julian had estate business that couldn't be postponed. Practical and efficient, as always, Eleanor had said when he explained this. Now, standing in the opulent bedroom that was now hers, Eleanor felt the weight of her new reality settling over her. This was her life now. These were her rooms. This was her marriage. A connecting door led to Julian's chambers. Eleanor stared at it, her heart pounding. Would he come through it tonight? He'd mentioned the necessity of heirs. Surely he'd want to... To begin that process sooner rather than later. The thought made her face burn. A knock at the connecting door made her jump. "Eleanor, may I come in?" She smoothed her dress and tried to calm her racing heart. "Yes." Julian entered, still dressed in his wedding clothes, though he'd removed his cravat. He looked tired and oddly uncertain, the first time she'd seen him appear anything less than perfectly composed. "I wanted to discuss tonight," he said without preamble. "Expectations and practicalities." Eleanor's face grew hotter. "Oh, yes. Of course. I won't rush you," Julian said firmly. "Despite my earlier comments about heirs, I'm not going to demand my husbandly rights tonight or any night until you're comfortable. We barely know each other. Intimacy should come with time and comfort." Relief flooded through Eleanor, followed immediately by confusion. "But I thought you said heirs were necessary." "They are, eventually. But there's no urgency. You've been through enough changes in the past 2 weeks. Adding that pressure seemed cruel." He moved to the window, looking out at the London streets. "I meant what I said about kindness, Eleanor. That extends to all aspects of our marriage." Eleanor didn't know what to say. She'd braced herself for an awkward clinical consummation tonight. His unexpected consideration left her off balance. "Thank you," she managed. "That's very thoughtful." Julian turned back to face her. "We're partners. Partners consider each other's comfort." He hesitated. "Would you like to dine together tonight? Not formally, just the two of us in the small dining room. We could talk, get to know each other beyond estate management and social obligations." The offer surprised her. "I'd like that." "Good. Shall we say 7 o'clock? After he left, Eleanor sank onto the edge of her enormous bed. Her husband had just left her alone on their wedding night. She should feel relieved. She did feel relieved. So why did a small part of her also feel disappointed? The dinner that night was surprisingly pleasant. Julian had arranged for them to eat in a small, informal dining room rather than the grand formal space. The table was intimate, and he'd instructed the servants to leave them alone between courses. "Tell me about your watercolors," Julian said as they began their soup. "You mentioned they're your passion." Eleanor was startled by the personal question. "They're nothing special. Just a hobby?" "I doubt that. You speak 3 languages and managed your brother's household for years on a minimal budget. You don't strike me as someone who does anything without skill." He set down his spoon. "I'd like to see your work, if you're willing to share it." No one had ever asked to see her paintings. They were her private escape, her way of capturing beauty in a world that found her lacking in it. "They're packed with my things," she said hesitantly. "I suppose I could show you. But truly, Your Grace—" "Julian," she corrected. "They're not accomplished. Just simple landscapes and still lifes. I'll judge that for myself." His tone was mild but firm. "Tomorrow, I'd like you to set up a studio. There's a room on the 3rd floor with excellent northern light. It's currently used for storage, but we can clear it out. You should have a proper space for your painting." Eleanor stared at him. "So you want to give me a studio?" "Why wouldn't I? You need a place to pursue your interests just as I have my study and my library." He seemed genuinely puzzled by her reaction. "What did you think would happen? That you'd simply sit around being decorative? Most duchesses do exactly that. Most duchesses aren't in partnerships with men who value their minds." Julian reached for his wineglass. "Eleanor, I meant what I said. I don't want an ornament or a silent companion. I want a partner, someone with her own thoughts, interests, and pursuits. Your painting is part of who you are. I won't ask you to abandon it." Something warm unfurled in Eleanor's chest. "Thank you. That's more than I expected." "Your expectations are too low." Julian's expression was serious. "I'm beginning to understand just how poorly you've been treated, not just by society, but by your own family." "My family wasn't cruel," Eleanor protested. "Just practical. They treated you as a burden and a failure for 7 years. Because men didn't flock to you, that is cruel." He leaned forward slightly. "You are not a burden, Eleanor, and you are certainly not a failure. The failure was theirs, in not recognizing your worth." Eleanor's throat tightened. No one had ever said anything like that to her. "You barely know me. How can you be so certain of my worth?" "Because I pay attention. Because I judge people by their character and actions, not their appearance or social success." He held her gaze. "And because in the past 2 weeks, you've shown me exactly who you are. Someone intelligent, resilient and kind, despite having every reason to be bitter. That's worth more than any pretty face." Eleanor had to look away, afraid she might cry. She'd spent 7 years believing herself worthless. Hearing Julian's assessment was overwhelming. They continued dinner, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Julian told her about his estates, his plans for agricultural improvements, his frustration with Parliament. Eleanor found herself relaxing, even laughing at his dry observations about various lords' incompetence. "You're funny," she said, surprised. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Did you think I'd be grim and humorless? I thought you'd be formal and distant. Instead, you're—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Human?" he suggested with a slight smile. "I'm not a statue, Eleanor, despite what society might think. I simply don't waste warmth on people who don't deserve it. You deserve it." That night, lying alone in her new bed, Eleanor replayed the conversation in her mind. Julian was nothing like what she'd expected. He was considerate without being patronizing, interested without being intrusive, warm without being presumptuous. And that small traitorous part of her heart whispered, "What if this becomes more than partnership?" She pushed the thought away firmly. She'd entered this marriage with clear understanding. Julian had been explicit about his emotional limitations. She couldn't allow herself to hope for more and risk the disappointment that would inevitably follow. Partnership was enough. It had to be enough. But as sleep claimed her, Eleanor couldn't quite silence the voice that wondered what it might feel like if Julian looked at her with something beyond respect. If he saw her not just as a worthy partner, but as a woman he desired. Their first major public appearance as a married couple came 3 days after the wedding. Lady Thornton's ball was one of the season's most anticipated events, and declining the invitation would have been noticed and commented upon. "We don't have to stay long," Julian assured Eleanor as their carriage approached the Thornton residence. "Make an appearance, dance once or twice, let society see us together, then leave." Eleanor's hands twisted in her lap. What if they're cruel?" "They will be cruel," Julian said bluntly. "Not to your face. No one would dare insult the Duchess of Ashford directly, but you'll hear whispers, see pointed looks, feel their judgment." He reached over and stilled her nervous hands with his own. "But you won't be alone, I'll be beside you. And anyone who dares openly disrespect you will answer to me." His touch was warm and steadying. Eleanor took a deep breath and nodded. The Thornton ballroom was everything the Devonshire ball had been, glittering, crowded, opulent. But this time, when Eleanor walked through the entrance, every head turned, not with indifference, but with avid curiosity. The whispers started immediately. "That's her? She's so plain. What could the Duke possibly see in her? My mother says she trapped him somehow. There must be a scandal we haven't heard about yet." Eleanor's face burned, but she kept her expression serene. Julian's hand at her elbow was a constant grounding presence. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They're small-minded fools whose opinions matter not at all." Lady Thornton greeted them effusively, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Your Grace and your Grace." She tittered at her own cleverness. "How wonderful to see you both. What a surprise your marriage was to everyone." "Was it?" Julian's tone was mild, but his eyes were cold. "I thought my interest in Miss Hartley was quite obvious to anyone paying attention." Lady Thornton's smile faltered. "Oh yes, of course, quite obvious. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must greet other guests." As they moved through the room, Eleanor noticed the reactions. Some people were openly staring. Others pretended not to see them at all. A few brave souls offered genuine congratulations. Margaret found them quickly, her face flushed with indignation. "Eleanor, have you heard what Lady Catherine is saying?" "Margaret, please," Eleanor began, but her friend was too agitated to stop. "She's telling everyone that the Duke must have been drunk when he proposed and felt honor-bound to go through with it. The absolute gall." "Lady Pembroke," Julian interrupted smoothly. "Thank you for your loyalty to my wife, but please don't trouble Eleanor with the ramblings of jealous women. Lady Catherine's daughter failed to attract my interest, despite her mother's blatant schemes. Her resentment is understandable if unbecoming." Margaret looked startled, then pleased. Yes, of course, Your Grace. I hate hearing people say awful things about my dearest friend." "As do I," Julian agreed, "which is why I'll be addressing any particularly vicious gossip directly. Some people need reminding that the Duchess of Ashford is under my protection." After Margaret moved away, Eleanor whispered, "You don't need to fight my battles." "Yes, I do. You're my wife. Your battles are my battles." Julian guided her toward the dance floor. Now shall we show society that we're united? A waltz, I think. Eleanor's heart jumped. You said you don't dance. I said I rarely dance, but I'll dance with my wife. He led her to the floor as the orchestra began a waltz. Fair warning, I'm competent but not graceful. He was better than competent. As they moved together, Eleanor felt the weight of hundreds of eyes watching them. But in Julian's arms, she felt almost safe, protected. You're doing well, Julian murmured. Your expression is perfectly composed. No one would guess you're uncomfortable. 7 years of practice at hiding my feelings, Eleanor replied. Julian's hand tightened slightly at her waist. You shouldn't have to hide them with me. Old habits. They danced in silence for a moment. Then Julian said quietly, You're a good dancer. Better than I expected. I had lessons. They just didn't help me attract partners. Eleanor tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. Their loss, my gain. Eleanor looked up at him, startled. Julian's expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes made her breath catch. It was gone in an instant, replaced by his usual composed mask. The dance ended. Julian escorted her off the floor to approving applause. They'd successfully presented themselves as a united couple, but as the evening progressed, the whispers continued. Eleanor caught fragments of conversations clearly meant for her to overhear. Fortune hunter, obviously. He'll keep a mistress, surely. Must be pregnant, why else would he marry so quickly? Each comment landed like a small cut. Eleanor kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt herself bleeding. They left the ball after an hour, as Julian had promised. In the carriage, Eleanor sat rigid and silent, fighting tears. She would not cry. She would not show weakness. Eleanor, Julian's voice was gentle. Look at me. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Eleanor, please. She finally looked up. Julian's expression was concerned. The first time she'd seen him show genuine emotion beyond mild interest or polite regard. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I knew they would be cruel, but I underestimated how cruel. You handled yourself with remarkable grace. I've had practice, Eleanor managed. Her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. You shouldn't have needed practice. Julian reached across the carriage and took her hand. What they said tonight, it's all lies born of jealousy and small-mindedness. You know that, don't you? Do I? Eleanor's composure cracked. They said I trapped you, that you must have been drunk or mad, that I'm nothing and you'll keep a mistress because why would you want a plain wife? And they're not wrong, are they? I am plain. I did trap you in a way. You married me for convenience, not because you wanted me. Stop! Julian's voice was sharp. Eleanor, stop! You didn't trap me. I sought you out. I proposed to you. I married you because I wanted exactly what you are. Intelligent, honest, kind. Every quality that matters. But not beautiful. Not desirable. Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and strangely intense. Do you truly believe I find you undesirable? Eleanor's breath caught. You said this was a partnership. That passion wasn't part of our arrangement. I said I didn't want a marriage based solely on passion. That's different from feeling no desire at all. He still held her hand, his thumb now moving in small circles on her palm. Eleanor, I'm not blind. You're my wife. Do you truly think I don't notice you? I don't know what you're saying. Julian leaned forward slightly. In the dim light of the carriage, his eyes seemed darker, more intense. I'm saying that partnership doesn't preclude attraction. Respect doesn't eliminate desire. I chose you for practical reasons, yes. But I'm not made of stone. Eleanor's heart was racing. Julian, I won't force anything, he continued. I meant what I said about letting you adjust. But don't mistake my patience for lack of interest. And certainly don't let society's poison make you doubt your worth. They arrived at Ashford House before Eleanor could respond. Julian helped her down from the carriage, his hand lingering at her elbow as they climbed the steps. Inside, the house was quiet, servants having retired for the night. Julian escorted Eleanor to her bedroom door. Get some rest, he said softly. Tomorrow will be easier, and the day after that, easier still. Eventually, society will find someone else to gossip about. Julian, Eleanor's voice was hesitant. Thank you for tonight, for defending me, for everything. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his usually composed face. We're partners, remember? Partners support each other. He bent and pressed a kiss to her forehead. It was gentle, brief, almost chaste. but it sent warmth flooding through Eleanor's entire body. "Good night, Eleanor. Good night." Eleanor entered her room in a daze. She prepared for bed mechanically, her mind replaying the carriage conversation. Julian had implied he found her attractive. He'd said he noticed her. He'd kissed her forehead with unexpected tenderness. Was it possible that their cold partnership might become something warmer? The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Over the next week, Eleanor noticed subtle changes in Julian's behavior. He sought out her company more often. He asked her opinions on matters beyond household management. He touched her more frequently, a hand at her back, an arm offered, fingers brushing hers as they reviewed correspondence together. Small gestures, but they accumulated. Eleanor found herself thinking about him constantly, watching for him, hoping for those brief moments of contact. She was falling for her husband. The realization hit her one afternoon as they walked through Ashford House's gardens. Julian was explaining his plans for renovating the orangery, his face animated with enthusiasm. Eleanor wasn't listening to the words. She was watching the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the strong line of his jaw. She was falling in love with a man who'd explicitly told her love wasn't part of their arrangement. "Eleanor? Are you listening?" She jerked her attention back. "I'm sorry. I was, distracted." Julian studied her face. "Is something wrong? You've seemed preoccupied lately." "No, nothing's wrong." Everything was wrong. She'd violated their unspoken agreement. She'd developed feelings he'd never promised to return. "Eleanor," Julian stepped closer, "we promised honesty to each other. If something's troubling you, I want to know." She couldn't tell him. Admitting her growing feelings would make everything awkward. It would ruin the comfortable partnership they'd built. "I'm fine, truly, just adjusting to everything." Julian didn't look convinced, but he didn't press. "All right. But Eleanor, whatever you need, whatever you're feeling, you can tell me." "I meant what I said about honesty." Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice, but she knew she couldn't tell him this truth. Not yet. Maybe not ever. 2 weeks into their marriage, Julian asked Eleanor to accompany him to Ashford Hall, his primary country estate in Kent. "The staff there should meet their new Duchess," he explained, "and I think you'll appreciate the house. It's far more beautiful than London." The journey took most of a day. As their carriage rolled through the Kent countryside, Julian pointed out landmarks and tenant farms. Eleanor watched his face as he spoke about the land. His usual reserved expression softened with genuine affection. "You love it here," she observed, "more than anywhere else. London is necessary for business and parliament, but Ashford Hall is home." He glanced at her. "I hope you'll feel the same eventually." Ashford Hall was magnificent, a sprawling Elizabethan manor surrounded by formal gardens and ancient oak trees. As they approached, Eleanor caught her breath. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Wait until you see the inside." Julian helped her from the carriage. "The long gallery has some of the finest portraiture in England, and the library—" He stopped, looking almost embarrassed. "Sorry, I'm enthusiastic about books." "Don't apologize. I love libraries." His smile was quick and genuine. "Then you'll spend half your time there, I suspect." The staff greeted them warmly. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper, was less intimidating than her London counterpart, her round face creasing with pleasure as she showed Eleanor through the main rooms. "It's wonderful to have a duchess in residence again," Mrs. Blackwood said. "The house has been too empty these past years." That evening, Julian gave Eleanor a private tour of the library. It was a 2-story room with floor-to-ceiling shelves, comfortable chairs, and large windows overlooking the gardens. Eleanor turned in a slow circle, overwhelmed. "This is incredible. It's yours as much as mine now." Julian pulled a book from a nearby shelf. "I thought you might appreciate this. It's a first edition of your favorite poetry collection." Eleanor took the book reverently. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it once in passing." "I pay attention." He moved closer. "Eleanor, there's something I've been wanting to—" He stopped abruptly as Eleanor looked up at him. They stood very close, the book between them. In the lamplight, Julian's eyes seemed darker, more intense. "What?" Eleanor whispered. Julian set the book aside carefully. "I've been wanting to do this." He cupped her face gently with both hands and kissed her. It wasn't like their wedding kiss, brief and perfunctory. This was slow, questioning, tender. His lips moved against hers with careful intensity, as if he were memorizing the feel of her. Eleanor's entire body went rigid with shock. Then, tentatively, she kissed him back. Julian made a soft sound, surprise, pleasure, and deepened the kiss slightly. His hands slid from her face to her waist, pulling her closer. Eleanor's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Julian rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for days," he admitted quietly, "but I didn't want to pressure you." Eleanor's mind was spinning. "I thought you said passion wasn't part of our arrangement." "I said our marriage wasn't based solely on passion. That's different." He pulled back slightly to look at her. "Eleanor, our arrangement was practical, but that doesn't mean it has to remain cold. Partnership can include other things, if you want them." "Do you want them?" Eleanor's voice was barely audible. Julian's expression was more open than she'd ever seen it. "Yes. God help me. Yes, I didn't expect this. I thought I could maintain emotional distance, but you've made that impossible." "How have I done that?" "By being exactly who you are. Intelligent, kind, honest. By making me laugh. By looking at me like I'm more than just a title and a fortune." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm falling for you, Eleanor, and I don't know what to do about it." Eleanor's heart felt like it might burst. "You're falling for me? Is that so surprising? You're remarkable. I've watched you navigate society's cruelty with grace. I've seen your kindness to servants. I've listened to your insights on everything from estate management to literature. How could I not fall for you? But you said you weren't capable of romantic attachment." Julian's expression turned rueful. "I was wrong. Or perhaps I just hadn't met the right person." He took her hands. "Eleanor, I know this complicates things. I know we agreed on a practical partnership. If you want to maintain that arrangement, I'll respect it. But I needed you to know the truth. I'm not indifferent to you, not remotely." Eleanor felt tears pricking her eyes. "I thought I was alone in this. I thought I was foolish for developing feelings." Julian's eyes widened. "You have feelings for me?" "I've been falling in love with you for weeks," Eleanor confessed. "But I was terrified to admit it because I thought you'd never feel the same." For a moment, Julian just stared at her. Then he laughed, a genuine, delighted sound she'd never heard from him. "We're both idiots," he said, "suffering in silence because we were too afraid to admit what was happening." "So what now?" Eleanor asked. Julian pulled her close again. "Now we stop pretending this is only a practical partnership. Now we allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling." He kissed her again, this time with less hesitation and more passion. "Now we build something real." That night, Julian knocked softly on the connecting door between their rooms. Eleanor, already in her nightgown, opened it with trembling hands. "May I come in?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. Her heart was racing. Julian entered, closing the door behind him. He wore a dark dressing gown, his hair slightly disheveled from where he'd run his hands through it. He looked nervous, an expression so unusual on him that it made Eleanor feel slightly braver. "Are you certain about this?" Julian asked. "We don't have to rush, we can wait until—" "I don't want to wait," Eleanor interrupted. "Unless you do." "God, no." Julian crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. "I've been wanting this. Wanting you. Trying to be patient and respectful when all I wanted was—" He kissed her, cutting off his own words. Eleanor wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she'd been suppressing for weeks. Julian picked her up, carrying her to the bed. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he murmured against her lips. "At any point, promise me." "I promise." What followed was tender and awkward and passionate and perfect. Julian was gentle, constantly checking that she was all right, moving slowly despite his obvious desire. When Eleanor tensed at moments of discomfort, he kissed her and whispered reassurances until she relaxed again. Afterward, they lay tangled together, both breathing hard. Julian pulled the covers over them and gathered Eleanor against his chest. "Are you all right?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm wonderful," Eleanor admitted. I didn't know it could be like that." "Like what?" "Intimate. Not just physically, but emotionally." She tilted her head to look at him. "I was afraid it would feel clinical, perfunctory." Julian's expression was tender. "Nothing about us is perfunctory anymore, Eleanor. I won't allow it to be." They talked late into the night, sharing things they'd never said aloud. Julian told her about his mother's betrayals, his father's bitterness, his determination never to be vulnerable that way. Eleanor shared her years of invisibility, her fear of being unwanted, her resignation to a life of endurance rather than joy. "I thought I was broken," Eleanor confessed. "Something fundamentally wrong with me that made me unlovable." "You're not broken. Society is broken for not seeing what was right in front of them." Julian tightened his arms around her. "Their loss is my extraordinary gain." "I never expected this," Eleanor whispered. "When you proposed on that terrace, I never imagined it could become real." "Neither did I. I thought I was arranging a practical partnership." Julian pressed a kiss to her hair. "Instead, I found everything I didn't know I needed." They fell asleep, wrapped around each other, and Eleanor woke the next morning to find Julian still beside her, watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart ache. "Good morning, wife," he murmured. "Good morning, husband. How do you feel?" Eleanor considered. "Happy, truly happy for the first time in years." Julian smiled and kissed her. "Good, because I intend to make you happy every day for the rest of our lives." The next weeks at Ashford Hall were idyllic. Away from London society's scrutiny, Julian and Eleanor's relationship blossomed. They spent mornings riding through the estate, afternoons reading together in the library, evenings talking by the fire. Julian set up a proper studio for Eleanor's painting, complete with the finest materials. He'd commissioned everything without telling her, revealing it as a surprise. "Julian, this is too much," Eleanor protested, overwhelmed by the expensive easels, paints, canvases. "Nothing is too much for you." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I want you to be happy, Eleanor. Truly happy. If painting makes you happy, then you'll have everything you need to paint." Eleanor turned in his arms. "You make me happy. This," she gestured at the studio, "is wonderful, but you're what makes me happy." Julian kissed her thoroughly. The feeling is entirely mutual. They made love often, learning each other's bodies and preferences. Julian proved to be an attentive, generous lover who took genuine pleasure in Eleanor's pleasure. Sometimes their encounters were passionate and urgent. Sometimes they were slow and tender. Always they were intimate in ways Eleanor had never imagined possible. "I love you," Julian said one night as they lay in bed together. "I know I'm not supposed to. I know that wasn't our arrangement. But I do. I love you completely." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. So much it terrifies me sometimes." "Don't be terrified. I'm not going anywhere. You're mine, and I'm yours. For the rest of our lives." Eventually, duty called them back to London. Parliament was in session, and Julian had responsibilities he couldn't avoid. Eleanor was reluctant to leave their private paradise at Ashford Hall, but she understood. "We'll return often," Julian promised, as they prepared for the journey. "This is our home. London is just where we work." Their return to London society was markedly different from their first appearance. Word had spread that the Duke and Duchess of Ashford were genuinely devoted to each other. The transformation in Julian, from cold and distant to obviously besotted, was the subject of much speculation. "I heard he barely lets her out of his sight," Lady Thornton whispered loudly at one ball. "He looks at her like she's the most beautiful woman in the world," another matron observed. "It's quite extraordinary." Eleanor, standing beside Julian, felt his hand tighten possessively on her waist. "Let them talk," he murmured in her ear. "They're simply jealous that we have what they don't. Genuine affection." Lady Catherine, whose daughter had failed to attract Julian's interest, was particularly bitter. At one gathering, she made a pointed comment about some women who lack the beauty typically expected of a duchess. Julian overheard and immediately approached her, his expression icy. "Lady Catherine, I believe you're confused. My wife possesses every quality a duchess requires: intelligence, kindness, integrity, and grace. Those who judge only by superficial appearance reveal their own shallowness, not others' deficiencies." The room fell silent. Lady Catherine turned red, then white. "Your Grace, I merely meant—" "I know precisely what you meant, and I suggest you guard your tongue in the future. I'm very protective of my wife, and I have a long memory." Julian offered his arm to Eleanor. "Come, darling. I believe we've spent enough time here." As they left, Eleanor whispered, "That was very forceful. She insulted you." "No one insults my wife." Julian's jaw was tight. "I should have said more. Done more. You defended me perfectly." Eleanor squeezed his arm. "Thank you." Over the following weeks, society gradually adjusted to the reality of the Ashford marriage. The gossip didn't stop entirely. Society always needed something to whisper about, but it shifted from malicious speculation to almost admiring astonishment. "The Duke is transformed," Lord Pemberton observed to Julian at their club. "I've known you for years, and I've never seen you like this." "Like what?" Julian asked. "Happy, content, like you found something you didn't know you were looking for." Julian smiled. "That's exactly what happened. I proposed to Eleanor thinking I was arranging a practical partnership. Instead, I found the love of my life. You're fortunate. Most men in arranged marriages never find that." "I know. I remind myself of that fortune every day." Eleanor also noticed the change in how people treated her. She was no longer the overlooked spinster, nor the questionable choice of a mad duke. She was the Duchess of Ashford, respected and even envied. But the transformation that mattered most was internal. Helena no longer felt invisible or worthless. Julian's love had healed wounds she'd carried for years, showing her that she had value beyond what society decreed. One evening, as they prepared for yet another ball, Eleanor stood before her mirror, adjusting her jewels. Julian came up behind her, meeting her eyes in the reflection. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm happy, that I never expected to be this happy." She turned to face him. "A year ago, I was standing alone at the Devonshire ball, believing I was worthless. Now I'm married to a man I love desperately, who somehow loves me back. It still doesn't feel entirely real." Julian framed her face with his hands. "It's real. I'm real. This love is real. And you were never worthless, Eleanor. Society was simply too blind to see what was right in front of them. You saw me. I did. And I count it as the greatest fortune of my life." He kissed her softly. "I love you, Eleanor Ashford. Every remarkable, beautiful, perfect part of you." "Beautiful?" Eleanor laughed. "Julian, I'm many things, but you are beautiful. Maybe not in the conventional way society values, but to me, you're the most beautiful woman in the world." He kissed her again. "Now come, let's go show society what real love looks like." 1 year after their wedding, Julian surprised Eleanor with a small celebration. Just the two of them at Ashford Hall, where their love had truly begun. "A year ago, I proposed a practical partnership to a woman I barely knew," Julian said, as they sat together in the library, their favorite room. "I thought I was being clever, rational, solving a problem efficiently. And instead," Eleanor prompted, smiling, "instead, I fell completely, irrevocably in love with my wife." He pulled her closer. "I discovered that partnership and passion aren't mutually exclusive, that respect can deepen into romance, that sometimes the most practical choice leads to the greatest joy." Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. "I spent 7 years believing I was unworthy of love, that I'd lived my whole life invisible and alone. Then you saw me, really saw me, and everything changed. I'm glad I saw you. I'm glad I was smart enough to recognize what everyone else missed." Julian pressed a kiss to her temple. "You've made me happier than I ever thought possible. The feeling is entirely mutual." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Eleanor said softly, "I have something to tell you." Julian straightened, searching her face. "What is it?" Eleanor took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I'm pregnant. Dr. Morrison confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a child." Julian's eyes widened, then filled with tears. "Truly? Truly?" "An heir to Ashford arriving next spring." Julian pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I love you so much, thank you. Thank you for saying yes that day in Hyde Park. Thank you for taking a chance on a cold proposition from a practical duke. Thank you for becoming my partner and my love. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did," Eleanor whispered. "For giving me a life I never dared dream of." They held each other as the sun set beyond the library windows, two people who'd found unexpected love in the most unlikely circumstances. Dear listener, as we close Eleanor and Julian's story, I invite you to carry their journey with you into your own life. Eleanor spent 7 years invisible, believing herself unworthy of love or notice. She had resigned herself to endurance rather than happiness. How many of us have felt the same, have believed ourselves overlooked, undervalued, undeserving of the love we secretly crave? But Eleanor's story reminds us that being overlooked by many doesn't mean being worthless. It simply means the right person hasn't seen you yet. And when they do, when someone finally looks past surface expectations to see the remarkable person beneath, everything can change in an instant. Julian thought he was immune to love, that past wounds had made him incapable of vulnerability. Yet Eleanor's quiet strength and honest heart broke through walls he'd spent years building. His transformation teaches us that it's never too late to open ourselves to love, even when we've convinced ourselves we're better off alone. Their partnership, built on respect and honesty, grew into a love deeper than either imagined possible. It shows us that the strongest foundations aren't always built on immediate passion, but on genuine knowledge and appreciation of another person's character. As you rest tonight, remember Eleanor standing alone at those 44 balls, believing herself invisible. Remember that your own worth isn't determined by who has or hasn't noticed you. Remember that your story isn't over. That unexpected joy can arrive when you least expect it, whispered by someone who finally sees what others missed. Like Julian and Eleanor, may you find someone who sees your true worth, someone who values your mind as much as anything else, someone who makes you feel not just loved, but truly seen. Sleep well, dear friend. Tomorrow brings new possibilities, new chapters, new chances to be seen and to see others. With all our hearts, the Legends of Passion team. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this tale with someone who needs to hear that they are worthy of love, even if they haven't been seen yet. Your support means everything to us. It inspires us to continue creating stories of hope, redemption, and unexpected love that remind us all that happy endings are possible, even for those who've waited longest. At the end of this video, you'll find another story from our channel, another journey of love discovered in unexpected places. Don't miss it. With deepest gratitude, the Legends of Passion team.